Achtung, welcome to We Have Ways of Making You Talk with me, Al Murray and James Holland. And the frost has bit where I am, Jim. The snow on the ground, even here in London.
Yeah, we had snow yesterday. That was quite exciting.
Yep.
My Daisy woke up all full of it, but it just wasn't enough to go tobogganing. The big problem is in Salisbury, we're out of fuel. There was no petrol.
Really?
No. I mean, hopefully there is this morning, because I've wandered around in Rachel's car, her modern Golf, looking for fuel.
Right.
It's literally, now it's saying, you have no miles left. Do you want me to help you find a petrol station? It's like, it's not going to help me because there isn't any petrol.
Jeepers.
I know what's going on.
Nothing works at the moment, does it? Anyway.
No. Who loves the dogs?
Now, you sent me, a couple of things.
I've had an interesting weekend, few days.
I mean, first things first, over the weekend, someone on Twitter said, hey, look, Spike Milligan's Battery Sergeant Major's diary is up for sale. And tweeted me that, and I forwarded it to you, and you're like, I've bought it.
I literally couldn't get there quick enough. So I went on to ABE Books, of which, frankly, I should have shares.
Yeah.
I spend an awful lot of money on ABE Books, and I always try and get the cheapest hardback. I don't want a paperback because you can't. It's very hard to annotate a paperback. And in the old days, those paperbacks, those sort of pan
they fall apart.
Paperbacks and corgis. They're what's called A format. So most paperbacks these days are B format, so they're a little bit bigger.
Right.
But A format is that really tiny one.
Small book, and the moment you...
Small print, cheap paper.
The back breaks and the pages fall out.
Back breaks, pages fall out. I haven't got enough room to annotate them.
Yeah.
It's too small. Pencil goes through the paper.
Yeah.
Et cetera, et cetera. So it's just,
My copy of Flamethrower was like that.
Yeah, no, it's no good at all. So I got hardback. So I bought this. This is Hugh Pond, Salerno. It was written in 1960 and stuff, but he's interviewed quite a few Germans, so it's quite interesting. I'm trying to work out if I can extricate some German experience from that. I just couldn't get on with it. I mean, I'm showing you here. Look how small it is.
Oh God,
it's absolutely hopeless. So I've splashed out.
There's the hardback. Look at that.
There's the hardback. Much better.
I
got that. But anyway, so I use ABE Books a lot. But I thought, okay, this is quite a big investment to get this original diary, which goes from January 1943 to December 1944. So it literally couldn't be better for my casino project.
Yeah, that's spot on, isn't it?
It's diary. It's what I want. I want contemporary stuff. And even better, of course, he's the Battery Sergeant Major for Spike Milligan's.
Yeah.
Because we've been having a bit of chat, haven't we? So it's like, can you use Spike Milligan's memoirs?
Probably not.
That's the problem. Can you not? What you really need is diaries, but his diaries were sold to a private punter.
Yeah, and have vanished. Yeah.
So it's slightly problematic.
Yeah, but now you can cross-reference Milligan via this contemporary diary. So, it'd be interesting to see if he's even in it, if Gunnar Milligan even turns up, or Lance Bombardier Milligan even turns up. Whether the Battery Sergeant Major even noticed him, or had time, or could be bothered to write about him.
I suspect so. I think an artillery battery is quite a small unit, isn't it? Really?
Yeah. And you're all in little groups, aren't you? I mean, it's what he makes clear. Anyway, so I went on to ABE Books, and there it was, but you couldn't really tell from the brief quite enough. So but it was Blackwell's Rare Books in Oxford, right?
So I rang him up, and instead of buying it online, I just bought it over the phone.
Right.
He said, we'll put it in recorded delivery, Royal Mail. And I was thinking,
no.
Really? So
we'll put it in Royal Mail recorded delivery on a train via Border Force, and we're sending a nurse with it, so it will be industrial action and travel chaos out of existence.
All that. so I'm feeling quite tense about it, and I'm not gonna assume it's mine until it actually arrives. If I'm briefly
Fair enough.
But anyway, fingers crossed. So that's interesting. and then the other day I was I went so I couldn't get into the National Archives at Kew till about February or something. It's
ridiculous, hopeless. Isn't it?
Absolutely hopeless.
What's going on there? What's going on there that means you? I mean, for those that have never tangled
music, go on.
Well, for those that have never tangled with the National Archive, or trying to get stuff out of the Imperial War Museum, take people through the process. Because I went to the National Archive when it was the Public Record Office when I was 15 to get the Arnhem battle diaries out, and I had to have a letter from my headmaster to give me clearance or whatever, sponsorship. and went down on the train and then from Bedford on the train and then on the tube to Kew. Found the diaries, all of which basically were exactly the stuff that was quoted in all the books I'd been reading. Right, so they'd been picked clean by historians, and you're only allowed the bits you'd ordered. Even then, this is 1984 or whatever, 1985. Yeah. Between 83 and 84, only allowed the bits you've ordered. That's that. And I remember it all being, very sort of hush-hush and white-gloved and serious and all that sort of thing. Has it changed?
Yeah, it's changed dramatically. Because I remember the first time I ever went to the National Archives, I was looking at the log of HMS Upholder.
All right, okay.
And it literally took me a week. Yeah, wanks and all that. And I had to annotate it in pencil because that was the only thing you could do.
Right.
And, we're talking 2002 or 2001 or something, So it was prehistoric period, really.
Yeah.
I would say the zenith of operating at the National Archives was 2019, when you could go there, you could photograph all to your heart's content. They had things so that you could photograph it, you could position your camera or your phone, so it took the perfect photograph, so it looked like a photocopy.
Wow.
You could order literally as much as you liked. You could order, you could kick off with 12 remotely.
Whoa.
And then when you got there, you could just keep ordering throughout the day.
So you could follow your nose, basically.
You could get through 40 files a day, no problem at all. Absolutely no problem at all. So it was really worth it, because obviously what happens is, the nature of these things is you order up quite a lot, and some stuff you sort of go, you flip through and you go, oh, no, that's not what I want at all. And you just toss it to one side. Now you can't do that. So you can order up 12 things in a day, I think it is. Yeah. But that's long lead. So that, you have to book yourself in kind of, several months ahead to do that.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you can order up sort of 4 on the day or something. But for me, coming from Wiltshire, it's just not worth it, because I'd get through that in an hour.
Yeah.
Probably.
Yeah.
Then it's time to go home again, and there's a whole host of other stuff that I would like to see, having got there, that I can't. So it's just absolutely hopeless. But anyway, the great thing is, and it's exactly the same with the Imperial War Museum. The Imperial War Museum now, you have to book quite a long way in ahead.
Yeah.
I would say, a month to 6 weeks. You could put yourself on the waiting list and someone might drop out, which is what happened the other day, which was great. And
6 weeks?
Something like that, yeah.
Right.
When I was trying to book a seat in October, I couldn't get a seat until middle of December.
But, this.
And then it has to come from Duxford, because they've moved their entire.
Yeah.
So
the archives
in the old days, pre-COVID, what you'd do is you'd ring up the IWM and you go, "Can I come in tomorrow?" And they go, "Yeah, no problem at all." Or I'm a bit buzzed tomorrow, but you can come on Thursday. You go,
what?
Right. And then they used to have the photograph archive. Used to be around the corner in Ansell Street.
Yeah.
It's like a separate building, and you go up there, there'd be absolutely no one there. It was all very shh again as well.
Right, yeah.
And you go into the room, and you'd get, and there'd just be huge stacks of photo albums.
Right.
Official photo albums with sort of like a big heavy cardboard covered in dark green cloth.
Right. And you'd pull one out, and you'd pick the pictures you wanted.
You'd pull out C42.
Yeah.
And you'd get it out of the thing, and you just take photographs of the photographs.
Right. But you can't do that anymore.
No, can't do it anymore, because the whole lot, Ansell Street's closed down. That's all now up in Duxford, and you can imagine the hassles of trying to get those huge, great, big, heavy folders down from Duxford to someone like me to see in a room up in.
Well, then that's suddenly
the reading room in the main building in the Imperial.
Well, then suddenly that's costing them money, so therefore you've got to pay for it, and
so they just make it very difficult for you to do.
Why?
They go, well, what do you want? Because I asked them the other day, I said, where do I see photos now? They said, well, you have to order them up for us. Which ones do you want to see? It's like, well, I want to see everything from Italy, from September 90. I want to look. Yeah. I want to see what there is.
What on earth's going on? Why would you?
I don't know. I think it's because they spent a huge amount of money on the atrium and the revamp and all the rest of it, and they're having to cut corners, and they've got not cut corners, cut costs rather. That's unfair. And they've got this huge facility at Duxford where they can,
where they
can save stuff, and I don't know, but it's incredibly frustrating, because it used to be both at Kew and the Imperial War Museum used to be incredibly user friendly.
Yeah, and
now they're not. You really got to plan ahead, and of course, sometimes it's hard to plan that far ahead.
Well, and also, but that's also not the nature of investigation, is it? If you're following your lead,
nose.
You're following your nose, and you see a thing. Well, maybe if I could see what the other gun battery along the line is saying at this point. You can pull them out. I'll need to grab that now, and you have a look. You can't. I mean, is it making writing history materially more difficult?
Yeah, must be.
Yeah,
because you've got to be, yes, I would say so. I mean, it doesn't mean say you can't do it. Of course you can. I mean, I've got more material for this book than I have for the last, God knows how many. I mean, I've done more primary archival research for this than I have for the last few by some margin. And that's because I set myself this task of trying to do it all from sort of, much as possible from contemporary sources. And also, I was kind of keen to find those, because we've got onto this whole thing about morale and stuff. I was very keen to sort of get those little nuggets, and they are hidden away. I mean, I've just been going through all the different sources from both the TNA, the National Archives, and from what I was getting in the States, and all the G2 stuff. They've got loads of captured diaries of Germans and stuff, and notes and little reports that they've translated, that they've captured.
Yeah.
And you get it starts to build a picture, doesn't it? And that's what you're wanting. You're wanting a kind of a sense of what are the Germans thinking. There's a whole thing here on sort of infantry operating with Tiger tanks, written by the Germans. It's just you can only find that stuff if you're doing primary research. But anyway. This is a very long-winded way of saying that the good news is that, I'm great mates with Steve Prince, who's head of the Naval Historical Branch. And he said, and I was moaning to him about not being able to get to the National Archives with ease, like I used to be able to in the old days, in the pre-COVID days. And he said, oh, don't worry about that, Jim. He said one of the advantages of working here is that we can order up 50 files at a time. He said, you tell me what you want and I'll order up for you.
Oh,
so he did.
Well, magnificent.
It was magnificent. And, no one telling me what to do. And so I had my big stash of folders there. They all were. And I went down to Portsmouth, went down to the historic dockyard. I mean, the Naval Historical Branch where we looked at the war diary. Had a lovely day with Steve and found all these amazing bits and pieces. One of which was this document that I immediately fired over to you, which was in the Alexander papers. Which was all about sort of various. It was a sort of under a file which was loosely morale, discipline, sickness, all that kind of stuff. It's
morale part 1, file number 34. Morale part 1, welfare part 2, discipline part 3.
Right,
and, just absolutely amazing stuff. So morale on the first page is morale. September 1943, mail for 8th Army, poor delivery. That's point 1.
Yeah. This is at his level. That's what I think is so interesting.
This is what's so amazing about this. Then 1944, May to June, NAFI canteens in Italy, provision of premises, objections to terms of resolution passed by Council of NAFI. So what's that? What's gone on there? May, officer was trained to accompany that draft overseas. Lieutenant Colonel Sparrow, Secretary of Morale, committed to travel in troopship with drafts in order to study the conditions under which they travel. So,
well, the fact that there is a Secretary of Morale committee is quite interesting, isn't it?
And the fact that Lieutenant Colonel Sparrow has been told to go and have a look, actually, that his committee's one thing, but he's been told to have a look at the conditions the men are travelling under and how that impinges on morale. And then this is very interesting. June to October, poor commercial telegraphic facilities for British troops. Failure of British cables and wireless to provide press and commercial facilities. Cable services behind those of the United States. Sir Edward Wilshaw Cable and Wireless Limited to visit Naples, Rome, etc. So Cable and Wireless there have been given a rocket because their communications provision is inadequate. And that's interesting. That's a private company doing that. That's a thing where they've obviously been, they're having to interface with a telecoms company, and that the telecoms company are doing a bad job, and that the first one is mail on here, and then you've got British poor provision of poor commercial telegraphic facilities for British troops. People can't send telegrams. People can't stay in touch with home. People aren't getting their mail. Then August 43, August 44, Sunday newspapers for the British troops, public to return their Sunday papers for dispatch overseas. See, I didn't know about that. You give your newspapers back and they get sent overseas. I mean, and then a suggestion.
I had no idea about that.
I didn't know about that. No, that is absolutely that is fascinating, because that's direct home front line impact policy, isn't it? And then a year later, suggestive new Director of Welfare Services, supplies of Sunday newspapers to troops be discontinued. I wonder why. Then you got in August a quarterly morale report sent to the Adjutant General to the Forces General Sir Ronald Adam, War Office. October, beer for the services in theatre abroad. So this is the summary of what the subjects are.
Yep.
This is interesting. December 44, unqualified promises made by theatre commanders as to Python causing political troubles.
Yep. So the Python scheme, for those who can't remember it or don't know it, Python scheme was basically you've been serving overseas for however long it is, 3 years, I think it is, or 2 years or something. You are then entitled to go home for 6 months.
Yeah.
Or 3 months or whatever.
You're
for a stint.
You're at the front of the queue for repatriation, basically. But
the quid pro quo on that is that if the war is still going on once your leave is up,
you have to come
there's
back.
no guarantee you'll go back to your same unit.
Yeah. But
it's almost certain you won't go back to your same unit.
But that's interesting because that's December 1944. That's causing a problem. Not as you might imagine, spring 45, where the end is plainly in sight. This is interesting. It's earlier than you might think there might be an issue with this, because after all, we've talked a lot about how in Europe people are going, right, well, in the spring of 45, well, I'm not going to go to the Far East after this. I'm done. I've done what was asked of me. But this is happening in this theatre in the Mediterranean in December 44. I think that's really, really interesting. And it shows this thing that there's this sort of morale sinkhole in Italy, basically.
Yeah.
That where morale is worse, so problems crop up sooner and in greater proportion than they do in Northwest Europe, where things have more momentum after all. That although things do stop and start in Northwest Europe, massive progress has been made. If you by December 44, you're in, you're on the German frontier, you're in Antwerp, you're all those things. And then 45, reported theft of parcels sent home by soldiers serving overseas, system of concession vouchers on letter packets. And then January, imposition of taxes on parcels sent home by soldiers serving overseas. You can see
that's
that
just wrong, isn't it?
You can see that going down very, very badly. But that might be soldiers sending home cutlery, stuff that they've pinched.
Yep. So quite big packages.
Yeah, and theft is after all, it's quite interesting, isn't it? Because again, on the Italian front, they talk much more about criminality and gangs of sort of criminal soldiers, deserters, sort of operating in gangs and stuff. And it gets talked about more explicitly than on the Northwest European front. I mean, the first telegram, which is about the mail, is very interesting. Personal from TAC HQ 8th Army to 15th Army Group, September the 23rd. Personal for General Alexander from General Montgomery. Present situation regarding mail for 8th Army and Desert Air Force is very bad. No letters received for a long time, an adverse comment and grumbling from troops. Nothing as such. An adverse effect on morale as lack of mail from home. I mean...
And it would have, wouldn't it?
And it would have. But this is at the highest level that this is going on.
Yep. This is Alexander's papers, private papers.
Yeah.
Left to the nation.
Yeah.
He is the Army Group Commander.
Yeah. Fault may possibly lie in UK or at AFHQ, but consider that action essential on the very highest level. Can you cable the PM or Secretary of State grateful for your help? So that's from Monty to Alex. And, we've talked an awful lot about how Monty and Alex, and Montgomery in particular, morale is his absolute,
yep.
That's his thing. If you've got good morale, you can get men to do what you want them to do. And if you haven't, you can't. And that he's writing to his boss about the mail being bad. It's absolutely fascinating stuff, this.
Yeah, there is. And then there's a fascinating letter from the 30th of May, 1944 from Ronald Adam.
Yeah.
Saying, my dear Alex, I'm trying to ensure that every 30 men that go overseas with an officer they know.
Yeah.
So this is the Repel Depots. I mean, British didn't call them Repel Depots, but this is a replacement depot. So this is, conscripts have an officer with them that they know. And that sounds so completely obvious. But you can also see how that doesn't happen. Yeah,
you can see why that wouldn't happen, because your churn in officers is high, isn't it? And so new officers are needed at the front sooner than men, perhaps, aren't they? Because your churn amongst subalterns particularly is very, very, very high. Yeah. And you need people all the time. But you could also see why it would be much better if men arrived in theatre with an officer they knew, for the sake of them keeping their stuff together. Our experience in this country is that the draft feels quite differently about proceeding overseas if it has an officer who's trained it to accompany the draft. Absence of draft is negligible when the draft knows that its own officer is going with it. So people don't abscond if they know the officer going with them. That might be like, well, if he's not going, why should I? He's trained us and now he's not coming with us. Well, sod that then. You can see, you could also understand that motivation. I believe that it also helped the draft to find its feet overseas if it keeps together under its officer as long as possible. I mean, it makes utter sense. And then he talks about Lieutenant Colonel Sparrow, who we talked about earlier on, the Secretary of the Marat.
Our friend Colonel Sparrow.
Incidentally, I'm sure he's sending out to North Africa, Italy and the Middle East, Lieutenant Colonel Sparrow, Coldstream Guards. So he's a guardsman, so he's a good chap.
So he's a good chap.
Yeah,
he's going to have a good sense.
You could rely on him. He's travelling out in a troop ship with drafts in order to study the conditions under which they travel. He's also trying to find out anything which the War Office can do to help you in Italy, e.g. mails, and with this in view, I've given him letters of introduction to Oliver and Corps commanders.
Oliver being Oliver Lease, commander of 8th Army by that point.
I mean, this is amazing under the bonnet stuff, Jim. It's
Well, it really is, because it's the stuff that doesn't get... It is, as you say, completely under the bonnet. It's just the stuff that you don't expect. You think they're just all kind of working about where, have they got enough ammunition and, what's the battle plan?
Where are the Germans most vulnerable? Where are we going to go next? I apologise for even writing to you when you have so much in hand. Well, there we are, right? Alex has got an awful lot in hand. He's trying to figure out how much ammunition he needs and
how he's going to get to Rome, and
how he's going to get to Rome. What's the weather going to? How's he going to?
Whether the whole going to Valmontone thing is a busted flush.
Yeah.
This stage, 30th of May, 1944.
It's Sparrow will not be out for 2 or 3 weeks, and if by any chance you have time to see him, I've told him to call in at your headquarters. Many congratulations on your wonderful success. It has been a great opening to the spring offensive. Yours, Adam. I mean, and then marked to the bottom in crayon, keep by Alex.
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
Why does Alex so particularly want to keep that one?
Well, is it because he wants to remind himself that this is part of the picture, that this is part of how you get this right?
It's got to be. It's got to be that.
Or is it him? Or is it him for posterity leaving a reminder to go? You know what? We had a lot of bloody problems.
I think it's the former. He's got to write a dispatch.
Yeah.
I think it's the former. Then there's another letter, a couple of pages on, 18th of January 1944. I don't know who this clerk is. It's yours ever, F Clark or G Clark or something. But it's not General Clark.
It's not Mark Clark. No.
It's not Mark Clark. And this is the incidents of VD in the ACMF.
Oh, yes. My favourite subject.
Today has reached an alarming level.
Yeah.
The British rates in Italy and Sicily are approximately 250 to 1,000 per annum. The American rate is perhaps slightly lower.
Yeah.
There are 3,200 cases under treatment in British hospitals and 2,000 in American hospitals in the CMF.
Yeah. Well.
Central Mediterranean Forces, that is, by the way. With an average stay of 20 days, there is a loss to the army of 64,000 British man days.
Amazing.
And 40,000 American man days, almost equivalent to the loss of 6 divisions. Well, when you put it like that.
Yeah. This is why this is so important. This is fascinating as well, because again, with these figures, these are the men who've come forward and said that, or are too ill to deny it. Because it's the army sees it as a self-inflicted injury. So you're in trouble. So if you go to your MO and say you've got VD, you're in trouble. So that this is who would this is surely the tip of a horrible manky iceberg, isn't it? I mean, so to speak. Should we take a quick break, Jim, and come back for more of this rather grim news? Welcome back to We Have Ways of Making You Talk. We're halfway through, as ever on this podcast, we're halfway through a telegram about VD, basically. Well, it's not a telegram, it's an internal memo.
It's an internal memo. But what I think is so interesting about this is it says point 5 is a study of the underlying causes reveals the following causal factors.
And it must mean causal factors. That must be a typo. There can't be causal
It must
factors.
be causal,
Yeah.
Casual factors. Yeah, that doesn't work at all, does it? 1, female. A, the sympathetic nature of Italian women. B, poverty and starvation, price 10 cigarettes or chocolate. C, infected women everywhere. And then 2, male. A, reaction after combat, i.e., they're scared now, they want a little bit of...
Yeah, they feel like they've earned some.
Yeah. B, lack of precautions after intercourse. Yeah, duh. C, non-realisation of seriousness of avoidable sickness. I doubt that.
I doubt that,
D, lack of leadership, unit and subunit control and want of discipline. Well, as you can imagine, I sent this off to Hallie Rubenhold and to Julie Lake.
Yeah.
And, they weren't that impressed, it has to be said. I mean, there is a very quick way of solving this, which is to have, if you're going to have brothels, have organised brothels, but actually start being a bit nicer to the Italian people.
Yeah.
One of the reasons the Italian women have to do it is because they've got no choice, because otherwise they're going to starve.
Yeah.
And the reason they're going to starve is because the exchange rate has been set appallingly high by bean counters in Algiers, Allied Forces headquarters, with a little bit of maliciousness creeping into it because, the Allies brought it on themselves, all the rest of it.
Yeah. You mean the Axis brought it on themselves, not the...
Well, no, the Italians, they started it. They joined the war on the 10th of June. It's their fault,
The other thing is, infected women everywhere. Well, what about infected men everywhere? I mean, the women, who are the women catching it off? Thank you very much. I mean, this is the... But there's a very... It's clear why this is, if there was less corruption amongst AMGOT and Allied Forces base wallers, if there was less black market, if people like Vito Genovese were kind of picked up straight away and not allowed to function, if there was more relief funds, if there was more feeding of Italians and providing food kitchens and, all this kind of stuff, they wouldn't have to do this. The vast majority of people who are prostituting themselves are not doing it because they want to. Yeah.
They're doing it because there is nothing left for them to do.
Yes,
to be able to feed themselves and their family.
So, sympathetic nature of Italian women is
it's just an insult.
I mean, it's interesting though because it says medical services are done and are doing all that's possible to do. Prophylactics are in ample supply. Medical propaganda is active. Hospitals are doing their best. AMG is actively hospitalising infected women and taking legal action for soliciting and pimping.
Yeah, but not much.
Exactly. Welfare is doing good work in static areas. In combat zones, it's not possible to organise centres.
Yeah, I would say point 3, expand, please, and show me some stats.
Yeah, and point 4 also. I mean, is it really going on in combat zones? It's in the static areas where this is happening. It's in Naples. It's in the big 100%.
It's in the big conurbations because that's where the women are.
Yeah. I mean,
there's lots of things you can do, and they're not doing any of it because they've got because Italy is stretched, because they've got their hands full, because they've got tough enough job just trying to fight at the front, and civil affairs is absolutely considered. There's lots and lots of people doing it, but it's not regulated and administered efficiently enough. Yeah.
I mean, basically, what this memo suggests is they really don't quite know what to do about it, or aren't prepared to do it. So it goes on. I'm sure you agree that apart from anything else, this loss in manpower under the existing shortage is a serious matter. So they're coming at this.
That's the problem. It's not the problem of miserable Italians or welfare. It's purely that this is causing us a problem because we're losing up to 6 divisions.
Yeah, I would therefore suggest that a really intensive anti-VD campaign be instituted and the importance of this matter be impressed upon all officers. In order to create, this as a solution is bonkers. In order to create a competitive spirit and to promote unit esprit de corps, I suggest that formations should publish weekly statistics by units and that the CEO of a unit with a bad record should be asked to give an explanation. I mean...
Why are you all shagging and getting the clap?
I mean, it's well, sir, because we're stuck a long way from home. We're miserable. and I mean, also, if units are publishing weekly statistics,
because I haven't got enough mail from home.
Well, exactly.
Yes,
and we came without an officer who could tell us what to do because we trust him.
Of course, it's all linked, isn't it? That's the whole point.
Well, but also, if it's a self-inflicted injury and you get in trouble for having VD. A unit which is publishing weekly statistics to find out, no one's going to admit it, are they? So it's got that is only going to make it more difficult to track. that as a solution, isn't it?
As a solution, it's a terrible one.
Yeah.
The solutions, as always with these things, are at the core, and you have to go back to basics, and you have to go, okay, well, why is it there are so many people prepared to prostitute themselves?
Yeah.
Reduce the number of prostitutes, you reduce the number of clap.
Yeah.
Simple as that.
Exactly. And then the next memo, 3rd of Feb, is like there's a decrease. And then, I mean, it's interesting that Alexander's
not by much.
I mean, it's interesting that Alexander's tracking these, and that these are in his first. These are in the morale bit. These are in the first bit of his documents from.
Well, and also on the 18th of January, it says the Americans are less. It's slightly lower, and then on the next one, it says the rate among American troops has always been very much higher.
Yeah. I mean, they just don't. I mean, the thing is, they don't know because there is this tangle about whether who admits it.
So this led me to I had this in the back of my mind when I was introducing Mark Clark for the first time.
Yeah,
and I've introduced him, and then I've talked about I've looked at the memo he sends out to everyone on the eve of the great crusade that they're about to undertake.
Yeah.
So he sends this out on the 30th of August, and he says, "Great opportunities lie ahead for our Fifth Army. Opportunities which will lead to the complete liberation of Europe from its present rule of tyranny." And he says that it's this massive privilege for Fifth Army to be associated with such a noble enterprise, blah, blah, blah. Our cause, he concludes, is a righteous one, and God will direct us in our undertaking. And I kind of just think it's really, really interesting because everything's changed from North Africa.
Yep.
So this is what I've written. If you could just bear with me. By the time he was writing this, much of Sicily's cities had been pounded into rubble. Large numbers of towns had similarly been reduced to dust, and many hundreds of thousands of Italians, both on Sicily and further afield in Italy, were discovering that modern war was brutally destructive in a way that had been unimaginable to many in the decade or so before the war had begun. And despite the warnings of prophets, such as the Italian Giulio Douhet, of the supremacy of air power in future wars. Yet Clark was not alone in believing the Allied cause was a just and noble one. Nazism nor fascism could be allowed to prevail. It was a cancer, an evil that had to be stopped, and it had to be stopped as quickly as possible with the lowest loss of life for those commanding the Allied armies. That was no easy task, but Clark, along with his fellow senior commanders in the Mediterranean, understood that victory could not be achieved without the young men under their command getting killed. What was also understood, however, was that victory needed to be achieved with as low a loss of these young lives as possible. And that meant using bombers and immense firepower and mechanization and modernity to do a lot of the hard yards. So this is all familiar stuff, of course.
Yeah.
And if that ensured that cities, towns and villages that barred their path were to be destroyed, then that was the price that had to be paid. Better a building than young Allied lives. Better Italian civilians than young Allied lives. After all, the Allies never asked the Italians to enter the war. Yet there was a paradox there, for if the Allies were liberators, was it right that they should be killing the people they were supposed to be liberating? Should the Italian people be paying for the crimes of their leaders? The point about fascism was that the people had no choice. That's what democratic nations disliked about dictatorships. Were the Allies truly liberators if they were also destroying the homes and lives of those they were pledging to help? The war had been a simpler undertaking during the war in the desert, when the population had been so very sparse. Italy was a population of some 40 million, most of whom lived in towns and villages along the coast and in the valleys, precisely through the area the Allies would be fighting.
I mean, there it is, Jim.
That's it, isn't it? And I think it's worth setting that up comparatively up front, because that's the point, isn't it? There is this paradox, isn't there?
Yeah.
What how can you be liberators if you're destroying Casino 100%?
Yeah. Well, and it's and the complication of your enemy. The Italians are your enemy one minute, they're not the next. So, and the minute they're not, then you what actually is your relationship with them? Because Are you? I mean, can you view it as liberation, seeing as there is this, because after all, fascism presents itself as a mass populist movement that's approved of by the population, doesn't it? So the thinking must be, it's not just the governments, it's the people who've succumbed and are complicit in all this. So if they're getting there must be people thinking that on the Allied side. So if they get in the way, tough shit, I mean, it's getting your head into that mindset. It's very difficult, isn't it?
Yes, except you're saying, so on the one hand, you're saying this is a mass popular movement that everyone's behind.
Yeah.
But by the same token, you're going, democracy's better.
Yeah, I know.
And the people are oppressed, and so we've come to liberate them from the oppression. But I know. I thought it was which is it? Either they're oppressed or they're not oppressed.
Well, it's complicated, isn't it?
Well, it's really complicated.
Well, it's complicated also because after all, when Katrin Himmler spoke at We Have Ways Fest in the autumn, in the summer rather, the point she was trying to make was, look, this is Nazism took over the whole of German society. Everyone was complicit in it, because she said, you've heard of my famous great uncle, but my grandpa was completely involved in this too. He was in the Nazi party. Just because he's not one of the sort of famous ones doesn't mean he wasn't part of what happened to Germany and wasn't one of the people doing it to Germany. So her argument is, yes, it's a dictatorship, but it's one that people have voluntarily sort of entered into.
So how can you then be liberating them? Because they've chosen that. And that's the paradox.
Yeah. This is it. It's a paradox that means you don't err on the side of mercy when you get to a place like Casino. All right, well, we'll destroy it then. Fine, whatever.
Well, no, because we need to get through. The Germans are in the way. Yeah. We're the liberators. We've got to keep. We've got to make sure that we lose as few people as possible.
Yeah.
Well, there's a big town in the way. Well. It doesn't sit easy with me, but at the end of the day,
yeah,
I've got young lives to look after.
Yeah.
Democratic lives, liberators' lives.
But better lives, in fact, because they're young democratic lives. Yeah. I mean, it's...
and of course, we all know that fascism might want to present itself as this great, big, popular movement.
Yeah.
But,
it isn't.
Yeah, well, it isn't, and B, if you're kind of living in San Pietro in Fine, in the base of Monte Sammucro, you can give a toss who's in charge. Well, because it's not going to affect your life. It's still going to be miserable and poor.
Well, you're not on the receiving end of the sort of the vital modernism. On offer, supposedly.
But you weren't before either. So
no, you weren't before either.
Of the conservative view on offer.
Yeah.
I mean,
and you may even not regard yourself as Italian. You may regard yourself as
as a Calabrian or Campanian.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's difficult stuff, this, isn't it? And yet when we talk about the Northwest European theatre, there's a kind of like, oh well, poor old French people in Normandy who got killed.
Yeah.
And a kind of tant pis about that. Never mind, too bad. And so by 1944, it's sort of been that has all been internalized in the Allied logic, hasn't it? And also, I mean, were there a Free French army fighting in, let's say in Normandy, there were a Free French army that then surrendered during the Normandy. Let's say what happens in Italy replicated itself in Normandy for as a thought experiment. Would that make Normandy more complicated as a sort of moral quandary, or would it make it, or would we just see it the same way? Because that's the complication, isn't it? It's the Italians change sides, and the population have no say in whichever side they're on. If we're honest, I mean, it's very difficult, isn't it?
It's really, really difficult, but I think it's worth. Yeah, from my point of view, from a narrative structural point of view, I think it's worth setting that up. Yeah, quite early.
But this also means this is also why good news from Italy is so important. This is why I have to get to Rome. This is why taking Rome on, is so important. And the sort of cloud around where they got that wrong leaves out the fact how important it is to have some good news and a clear victory. And you're liberators, so you take the capital city, and the government, you put the seal on the whole thing politically in that respect. I mean, Oh, it's complicated,
Yeah.
isn't it?
But anyway, we should get back to this Alexander document because as you can imagine, you know what a big fan I am of Alexander, and there's this letter on the this letter from Alex. He's had a whole load of memos, people saying there's lots of desertion, there's lots of looting. He's not happy about it. So on the 18th of February, which let's face it, it's 3 days after the bombing of Monte Cassino Monastery. Yeah. He writes to Sir Henry Maitland Wilson, who is the Supreme Allied Commander in the Mediterranean by this point, because Eisenhower has returned to Britain to take over for Overlord.
Yeah.
Problem of desertion is a very serious one, and I wish to ask your personal assistance in dealing with it.
Yeah.
Point 4. This is a bit that kind of I found quite difficult when I was reading it. The abolition of the death penalty for desertion has undoubtedly been a great mistake. I've repeatedly emphasized this. I am convinced that this penalty should be reintroduced. And when I read that, I thought, no, not lovely Alex, who's so nice and charming and writes lovely letters to his children with pictures, and who's so humorous and good-natured and imperturbable and my complete hero. How can he be asking this? And actually, reading on, it's clear that he's not really suggesting it should be used in a kind of, everyone should be lined up and shot by any stretch of imagination. He just wants the threat of it there.
He wants the possibility of the sanction. Yes, because he
thinks otherwise the people don't care. Because he points out that their sentences always get commuted. They're always given a second chance. Yeah, nothing really happens to him. It's just too easy. It's too easy to desert.
So then, I mean, it's interesting because he talks about fairness.
Yes, the point 6 is really interesting, isn't it?
I hope that you will do your utmost to secure action on these lines. The present situation is very unfair. It is unfair on commanding officers and company commanders who bear heavy enough strain during operations without the addition of the sense of uncertainty as the behaviour of some of their men. It is unfair to the men who stay to fight without the aid of their disloyal comrade. It is unfair to the man himself. Most of these deserters are not bad men. Many of them have fought well. They would not have disgraced themselves if they had the moral stiffening which the prospect of adequate punishment would provide. I mean, cracky.
Yeah, absolutely. What's really interesting is he's told, forget it, that's not going to happen.
Yeah.
Not in a million years.
But the problem is the moral stiffening with the prospect of adequate punishment, blah, blah. You're going to have to shoot someone to show that you're going to do it.
Yeah.
Which after all is what the Americans do. They do shoot. They do execute.
They shoot one, don't they?
They shoot one, yeah. And he was
a murdering, thieving bastard and had it coming. Exactly. Well, I would never say that, but you know what I mean.
Yeah. But so the reply, death penalty, point 2, and this is the 25th of February, 1944, and this is from Adam, and it's interesting because I mean it's just so interesting. This has gone all the way to the Adjutant General. Point 2, death penalty. One cannot see any prospect of this being reintroduced, and it is difficult to get comparative figures to prove that there is more desertion.
Even though he's actually in favour of himself, isn't he?
Yeah, he has. Yeah. But he knows it won't wash. There's more. Even it should be noted, however, that the crime of self-inflicted wound is almost unknown now, and would certainly reappear if the death penalty were reintroduced for desertion.
Fair point.
Fascinating. This is really, really interesting stuff.
It really is. It's just absolutely amazing. I just looked at it.
In addition, unofficially, it should be circulated through the force that deserters will be transferred to Burma or the Far East, where they will continue to fight to the end of the war with Japan. Now that's interesting.
Yeah, where's that bit?
That's at the end of that. That's at the end of that memo. Keep going down down the Adam letter.
Oh yes. In addition, right at the very end.
I mean, isn't that interesting? That's not unlike...
You desert here, you get captured, and you'll be sent to Burma and fight the Japanese. But
that's not unlike what Dan Ellin said about LMF, that LMF is a thing the RAF encouraged the idea that it exists, but it maybe doesn't, and discipline over LMF. So what you've got here is put about word. Unofficially, it should be circulated through the force. You're going to Burma, mate, if you carry on like this. I think that's really interesting. That's not an order, is it? That's give us a Burma.
So
vibe
you desert
here.
in your court. Yeah. You'll end up in a jungle fighting the Japanese, and they have swords and they chop heads off.
And you don't want to do that, and they'll chop your head off. Yeah, exactly. Like, you think things are bad here? Just you wait. I mean, that's fascinating,
isn't it? It really is. I just think it's such an interesting thing. I mean, my initial shock is lessened now, as I can see why he wants what he, as you say, as we were saying, it's a threat, isn't it, rather than wanting to go around executing everybody.
Yeah. Because the the next letter's to Wilson from Adam, and it says, "There's no chance of getting the death penalty now. I tried before El Alamein and was stopped because it could not be introduced when the British Army was in trouble."
Yeah.
And, and I wrote to General Alexander after the victory and asked him for his views, and he said he did not like to have it when the army was in triumph.
Yeah.
So you can't introduce it when things are going badly, and you can't introduce it when things are going well.
No, it's that's a ship that's sailed. Thank goodness.
Yeah.
And that's the Labour Party, isn't it?
Yeah.
Is it the Labour Party that insists, because it comes it's outlawed, I think, in the early 1930s. When's Ramsay MacDonald's Labour government? 32, 33?
Yeah.
Something like that.
Yeah.
It's before the Conservatives come back with Stanley Baldwin for the second time, isn't it?
But what's interesting is there's an annotated version of that memo with Alex's notes on it. This is not accurate, he writes after
it's amazing,
the Army
isn't
in
it?
Triumph. This statement is inaccurate, and I was always said this. It was a great mistake to have done away with the death penalty for desertion. I recommend the death penalty be reintroduced for for cases of aggravated desertion. Right. I admit that it would be a difficult thing to get through the House. As it is a political question, I couldn't advise when this should be tried, Alexander.
Amazing. There's handwritten notes added onto that memo.
Yeah, absolutely incredible. Well, I'm afraid, Jim, I'm out of time now. I've got to get on as well. Yeah, but this is amazing stuff. We're going to have to chew over this.
Yeah. It's good. It's also very good for me to be able to talk through all this stuff with you as I'm looking at it, because I always find sometimes, you need someone to kind of chew the cud with on this stuff to to sort of help yourself articulate what it is you're trying to think.
Well, it's fascinating stuff. We'll come back to this, I reckon. Another deep dive next time. Thanks very much for listening, everyone. We will see you all very soon. Cheerio.
Cheerio.